I never imagined that my simple act of preparing for Florida hurricane season would lead to a showdown with the most vindictive homeowners association president in Clearwater history. But here I was, standing in my ransacked garage on a sweltering August afternoon, staring at the empty shelf where $300 worth of emergency candles used to sit. My name is Quinton Yates, and I had moved into the Sunset Palms community 6 months ago after my divorce was finalized. The gated neighborhood seemed perfect at first. Quiet streets lined with Mediterranean-style homes, manicured lawns, and a community center that hosted weekly events. I was a software engineer working from home, and the stable, organized environment seemed like exactly what I needed to rebuild my life. What I did not know was that the HOA president, Patricia Mendez, ran the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom, and crossing her even accidentally was like poking a hornet's nest with a stick. The candles had been expensive, high-quality emergency candles designed to burn for up to 72 hours each. I had bought them after watching the weather reports predict an unusually active hurricane season. Growing up in Ohio, I had never dealt with hurricanes before, and my neighbor, an elderly man named George, had warned me to stock up on supplies. Batteries, water, non-perishable food, and candles. Lots of candles. The power grid in our area was notoriously unreliable during storms, he had told me, sometimes going down for days at a time. I had stored them neatly on a shelf in my garage, along with battery-powered lanterns, a hand-crank radio, and cases of bottled water. My garage door had been closed but unlocked that morning when I left for a quick trip to the grocery store. I had only been gone for 45 minutes, maybe an hour at most. When I returned and pulled into my driveway, everything looked normal. It was not until I went to grab a box of tools from the garage that I noticed the candles were gone. At first, I thought maybe I had misremembered where I put them. I searched the entire garage, moving boxes and checking behind my lawn equipment. Nothing. Then I checked the house, thinking maybe I had brought them inside for some reason. Still nothing. That was when I noticed the door leading from my garage into my backyard was slightly ajar. I always kept that door locked. Always. My heart rate kicked up as I walked outside and looked around my yard. Everything seemed undisturbed except for some faint shoe prints in the grass leading toward the back gate. The gate was closed but unlatched. Someone had definitely been in my garage and had taken only the candles, leaving everything else untouched. My expensive power tools, my bike, my camping gear, all of it was still there. Just the candles were gone. I pulled out my phone and was about to call the police when I heard loud music coming from the direction of the community center, which was located about 2 blocks from my house. Curious, I walked down the sidewalk, following the sound of what appeared to be some kind of party. As I got closer, I could see balloons and streamers decorating the entrance to the center, and a large banner that read Annual HOA Appreciation Gala. I had completely forgotten about the event. There had been multiple notices about it in the community newsletter, and several emails from Patricia Mendez reminding everyone about the mandatory celebration of community excellence. Attendance was supposedly voluntary, but Patricia had a way of making voluntary things feel mandatory through passive-aggressive comments at monthly meetings. I walked up to the entrance where a folding table had been set up with a guest list. A woman I recognized as Sandra Cole, the HOA secretary, sat behind the table checking people in. She looked up and gave me a tight smile. "Quinton, hello. Are you here for the gala?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was surprised to see me. "Actually, I am looking for Patricia. Is she here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level, Sandra's expression shifted to something between concern and wariness. "She is inside supervising the decorations. Is everything all right?" "I need to talk to her about something that went missing from my property," I said. Sandra's eyes widened slightly and she glanced toward the door. "Oh, well, she is very busy right now. Maybe you could come back later or send her an email." "This cannot wait," I said firmly. "Someone broke into my garage and stole $300 worth of emergency supplies." Before Sandra could respond, Patricia Mendez herself emerged from the community center, her arms full of what appeared to be decorative items. She was a woman in her mid-50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, excessive makeup, and an outfit that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She stopped when she saw me, and her expression immediately hardened. "Quinton," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a surprise! I did not think you would be joining us for the gala." "I am not here for the party," I said, walking closer. "I am here because someone broke into my garage this morning and stole all my emergency candles. You would not know anything about that, would you?" Patricia's face remained perfectly composed, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt, defensiveness. It was hard to tell. "Why would I know anything about your missing items? That sounds like a matter for the police." "It does it not?" I said, pulling out my phone. "I was just about to call them when I heard the party going on and thought I would check here first." "Wait," Patricia said quickly, holding up a hand. "There is no need to involve the police over some candles. I am sure there is a perfectly reasonable explanation." "I am listening," I said, crossing my arms. Patricia glanced at Sandra, who was watching our exchange with obvious discomfort. Then she sighed dramatically and gestured for me to follow her inside. "Let us discuss this privately." I followed her into the community center, and what I saw made my blood boil. The entire main hall had been transformed into an elaborate party venue with white tablecloths, fancy place settings, and centerpieces on every table. The centerpieces were what caught my attention. Each one consisted of a decorative glass bowl filled with sand, seashells, and in the center, one of my emergency candles. My distinctive, expensive, long-burning emergency candles that I had specifically purchased for hurricane preparedness. "You have got to be kidding me," I said, my voice rising. "Those are my candles." Patricia had the audacity to look offended. "These candles were donated to the HOA for community use." "Donated? I did not donate anything. Someone stole them from my garage this morning." "That is a very serious accusation," Patricia said, her tone turning icy. "I received these candles as a donation from a community member who wanted to contribute to making our gala special. If there was some kind of misunderstanding, that is hardly my fault." "Who donated them?" I demanded. "Give me a name." Patricia pressed her lips together. "I am not at liberty to disclose that information. Donor privacy is important." I could not believe what I was hearing. "This is insane. Those are my candles, stolen from my property. I am calling the police right now." I started to dial, but Patricia stepped closer, lowering her voice to something that was almost threatening. "Think very carefully about what you are doing, Quinton. Making false accusations and disrupting a community event could have serious consequences for you. The HOA board has the authority to levy fines for behavior that disturbs the peace and harmony of our neighborhood." "Are you threatening me?" I asked incredulously. "I am simply reminding you of the rules you agreed to when you purchased your home here," she said smoothly. "Now, I am willing to reimburse you for the alleged candles, say $50, and we can put this whole misunderstanding behind us." $50. They cost $300 and they were not alleged. They are right there on those tables. Patricia shrugged. "That is my offer. Take it or leave it." I looked around the room, counting the tables. There were at least 20 centerpieces, and I had purchased 24 candles. Someone had also scattered smaller votive candles around the room, and I recognized those too. They were the emergency tea lights I had bought to supplement the larger candles. "You stole all my hurricane supplies to decorate a party," I said, trying to keep my anger in check. "Do you understand how irresponsible that is? Hurricane season is active right now. There is a tropical storm developing in the Atlantic as we speak." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "You are being dramatic. Even if a storm does come, we have plenty of time to prepare. Besides, the community needs to come together and celebrate our achievements. That is more important than your paranoid hoarding." That was it. I had tried to be reasonable, but this woman was impossible. I finished dialing 911 and brought the phone to my ear. Patricia's face turned red and she grabbed my arm. "Do not you dare," she hissed. I pulled my arm away. "Do not touch me." The emergency operator answered. 911, what is your emergency?" "I would like to report a theft," I said, keeping my eyes on Patricia. "Someone stole $300 worth of property from my garage, and I have located the stolen items at the Sunset Palms Community Center in Clearwater." Patricia's expression went from angry to panicked. She turned to Sandra, who had followed us inside, and whispered something urgently. Sandra looked horrified and shook her head, backing away. The operator took down my information and said an officer would be dispatched shortly. I thanked her and hung up. Patricia had regained some of her composure, and now she was looking at me with pure hatred. "You are going to regret this," she said quietly. "I will make your life in this neighborhood a living hell." "Looking forward to it," I replied sarcastically. I waited outside the community center for the police to arrive. Several residents who had come for the gala gave me curious looks as they walked past, but no one said anything. About 15 minutes later, a Clearwater Police Department cruiser pulled up and a young officer stepped out. His name tag read Officer Martinez. "You reported a theft?" he asked, pulling out a notepad. I explained the whole situation, from discovering the missing candles to finding them being used as party decorations inside. Officer Martinez listened carefully, asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he nodded and asked me to show him the candles. We went inside together, and I pointed out the centerpieces. Patricia immediately approached, putting on her most charming smile. "Officer, thank goodness you are here. This man has been harassing me and disrupting our community event with baseless accusations." Officer Martinez ignored her and walked over to one of the tables, examining the candle in the centerpiece. "Sir, can you prove these are your candles?" I had anticipated this question. "They are a specific brand and type. I have the receipt in my email from when I ordered them online 2 weeks ago. I can pull it up right now." I got out my phone and found the confirmation email from the emergency supply website. The receipt clearly showed the purchase of 24 large emergency candles and a package of 50 tea lights, matching exactly what was displayed around the room. Officer Martinez looked at the receipt, then at the candles. "Madam," he said, turning to Patricia, "can you provide proof of how you acquired these candles?" "They were donated anonymously," Patricia said quickly. "I have no way of proving their origin, but I certainly did not steal them. Did you personally take them from this gentleman's garage?" Officer Martinez asked. "Absolutely not. I have been here at the center since early this morning preparing for the gala." "Can anyone verify that?" he asked. Patricia gestured to Sandra. "Sandra has been with me all morning." Officer Martinez looked at Sandra, who had gone pale. "Is that accurate, madam?" Sandra opened her mouth, closed it, then looked between Patricia and me. I was here, but Patricia left for about an hour this morning. She said she had to pick up some supplies. Sandra, Patricia snapped. I am sorry, Patricia, but I am not lying to the police, Sandra said, her voice shaking. Officer Martinez's expression became more serious. Madam, what time did you leave and return? Patricia glared at Sandra before answering. I left around 9 and came back before 10:30. I went to pick up the tablecloths we rented. Can you provide a receipt or contact information for the rental company? Officer Martinez asked. Patricia hesitated. I paid cash. This was getting more incriminating by the minute. I spoke up. I left my house at 9:15 and returned just after 10. My garage door was closed but unlocked, and the back door was left open. Someone who knew the layout of the neighborhood could have easily come through the back gate, taken the candles, and left within minutes. Officer Martinez turned back to Patricia. Do you know the layout of this gentleman's property? I am the HOA president. I know every property in this neighborhood, Patricia said defensively. That does not mean I broke into his garage. But you cannot explain how you came into possession of candles that match exactly what was stolen from his property, during the exact time window when the theft occurred. Officer Martinez pressed. Patricia's composure was cracking. This is ridiculous. I am a respected member of this community. I volunteer my time to make this neighborhood beautiful and organized. I would never steal from a resident. Then you would not mind if we checked your vehicle for any evidence linking you to the theft, Officer Martinez suggested. I absolutely mind. You need a warrant for that, Patricia shot back. The situation was escalating fast. More residents had gathered outside, attracted by the police car and the commotion. Officer Martinez excused himself to make a phone call, presumably to his supervisor. While he was outside, I watched Patricia, who was frantically texting someone on her phone. Sandra had moved away and was talking quietly with some of the other residents who had arrived. Officer Martinez returned a few minutes later with another officer, an older woman whose name tag identified her as Sergeant Powell. She introduced herself and asked me to explain the situation again from the beginning. I did, showing her the receipt and the candles being used in the centerpieces. Sergeant Powell then spoke with Patricia, who had regained some of her composure and was sticking to her story about anonymous donations. The sergeant walked around the room, examining the decorations, then stepped outside to confer with Officer Martinez. I waited, my heart pounding. I knew what I had seen, and I knew those were my candles, but proving theft was harder than I had anticipated. What if they could not do anything? What if Patricia got away with this? After what felt like an eternity, Sergeant Powell came back inside and approached Patricia. Madam, based on the evidence and the timeline, we have reasonable suspicion to believe these items were stolen from Mr. Yates's property. We are going to need to collect these candles as evidence, and we would like you to come down to the station to answer some additional questions. Patricia's face went white. You cannot be serious. This is harassment. You are not under arrest, Sergeant Powell clarified, but we need to investigate this matter further. You can cooperate voluntarily or we can pursue other avenues. Your choice. Patricia looked around desperately, but no one met her eyes. Even Sandra had disappeared. Finally, she grabbed her purse and said, "Fine, but my lawyer will hear about this." As the officers escorted Patricia out, I felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. Had that really just happened? The HOA president had stolen my emergency supplies and was now being questioned by the police at a community event she had organized. It would have been comical if it were not so infuriating. Sandra approached me cautiously. "Quinton, I am so sorry. I had no idea those candles were stolen. Patricia just showed up with them this morning and said someone had donated them. I should have questioned it." "It is not your fault," I said, though I was still angry. "But someone needs to check Patricia's authority. This is completely out of control." "I know," Sandra said quietly. "This is not the first time she has done something questionable. Last year, she had someone's car towed from their own driveway because she thought it was an eyesore. The board had to reimburse the homeowner for the towing fees. She has been getting worse." Other residents had started gathering, asking what happened. Word spread quickly, and within an hour it seemed like everyone in the neighborhood knew that Patricia had been taken in for police questioning over stolen candles. My phone started buzzing with messages from neighbors I barely knew, some offering support, others asking for details. The gala was obviously canceled. The police had taken all my candles as evidence, tagging and photographing each one. They assured me I would get them back once the investigation was complete, but that could take weeks. In the meantime, I was back to square one with hurricane preparedness, and the weather forecast was not looking good. That evening, I sat in my living room watching the news. The tropical storm I had mentioned to Patricia had been upgraded to a hurricane, Hurricane Delilah, and it was projected to make landfall somewhere along Florida's Gulf Coast within the next 5 to 7 days. The meteorologist was urging residents to stock up on supplies and prepare evacuation plans. Great. Just great. I spent the next day driving around to different stores, trying to replace my stolen emergency supplies. But I was not the only one with that idea. The hurricane forecast had everyone panicking, and the stores were already running low on batteries, water, and yes, candles. I managed to find some basic supplies, but nothing like the comprehensive setup I had before. That afternoon, I received a call from Sergeant Powell. She asked if I could come down to the station to provide a formal statement. I agreed and drove over immediately. At the station, she led me to a small interview room and explained what they had found. We executed a search of Miss Mendez's vehicle with her consent, trying to avoid the warrant process, Sergeant Powell began. We found a receipt from a hardware store dated this morning, time-stamped at 9:47, for party supplies. However, the store is in the opposite direction from the rental company she claimed to visit. So she lied about where she went, I said. It appears so. We also checked her phone records with her permission, and she made several calls this morning to another resident, someone named Carol Hutchins. Do you know her? I thought for a moment. The name sounds familiar. I think she lives a few streets over. We spoke with Miss Hutchins, and she admitted that Miss Mendez called her this morning asking if she knew anyone who had spare candles for the gala. Miss Hutchins said she did not have any and suggested just buying some, but Miss Mendez said that would be too expensive and she had a better idea. I leaned forward. Did she say what the better idea was? No, but the timing is suspicious. After that call, there is a gap in Miss Mendez's phone activity that corresponds with when your candles were stolen. So what happens now? I asked. We are building a case for burglary and theft. The value of the stolen items, $300, makes this a petit theft in Florida, a misdemeanor. However, the fact that she entered your property without permission could elevate it to burglary, which is a felony. My jaw dropped. A felony? I just wanted my candles back. I understand, but the law is the law. She unlawfully entered your garage with the intent to commit theft. That is burglary. We will present the evidence to the state attorney's office, and they will decide whether to file charges. I left the police station feeling overwhelmed. What had started as a frustrating theft had turned into a full-blown legal case. Part of me felt guilty about how far this had escalated, but another part of me was angry that Patricia had thought she could just take whatever she wanted and face no consequences. Over the next few days, The neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. An emergency HOA board meeting was called to address the situation. I attended, curious to see what would happen. The meeting was packed, with standing room only in the community center. The board consisted of 5 members, including Patricia, who was notably absent. The vice president, a man named Donald Richardson, called the meeting to order. He was a retired accountant in his 60s who always seemed uncomfortable with confrontation. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Donald began nervously. "As you all probably know by now, there has been an incident involving our president, Patricia Mendez. She is currently dealing with some legal matters, and in her absence, I will be assuming her duties temporarily." Someone in the crowd shouted, "What exactly did she do?" Donald cleared his throat. "There are allegations that Patricia took some items from a resident's property without permission. The matter is under police investigation, so I cannot say much more than that." "She stole his hurricane supplies to decorate a party," someone else yelled. "We all saw the police taking the candles." The room erupted in conversation. Donald tried to restore order by banging his gavel, but it took several minutes for people to quiet down. "Regardless of what happened, we need to address the immediate concerns," Donald continued. "First, the gala has been canceled and all ticket purchases will be refunded. Second, we need to discuss whether Patricia should remain as president given these allegations." Sandra, who was sitting at the board table, raised her hand. "I move that we vote to temporarily suspend Patricia from her duties as president pending the outcome of the legal investigation." "I second that motion," said another board member, a woman named Jennifer Wu. The vote was unanimous. Patricia was suspended, and Donald would serve as acting president. Then they opened the floor to general comments, and that was when things got really interesting. A man I recognized from seeing him walking his dog stood up. "I want to know what other shady stuff Patricia has been doing. Because I got fined $200 last month for having my trash cans visible from the street, but they were only out for like an hour after pickup. Meanwhile, her friend Carol never gets fined for anything even though her yard looks like a jungle." This opened the floodgates. One by one, residents stood up sharing stories about arbitrary fines, selective enforcement of rules, and favoritism. A woman named Rachel described how Patricia had threatened to fine her for painting her front door teal instead of an approved color, even though several other houses had non-standard door colors. Another man, Miguel, explained that he had been denied approval to install solar panels, while Patricia's next-door neighbor had been approved for a nearly identical installation. It became clear that Patricia had been running the HOA like her personal kingdom, using her position to punish people she did not like and protect her friends. The meeting lasted almost 3 hours, and by the end, the board had agreed to conduct a full audit of Patricia's decisions over the past 2 years and review all recent fines and violations. I left the meeting feeling somewhat vindicated but also worried. Hurricane Delilah was now a Category 3 storm and had shifted its projected path slightly north. Clearwater was now in the potential strike zone. The governor had declared a state of emergency, and mandatory evacuations were being issued for coastal areas. My neighborhood was not in a mandatory evacuation zone, but officials were recommending that everyone prepare for the possibility of losing power for an extended period. And here I was, with minimal emergency supplies because the HOA president had stolen them for party decorations. I spent the next day securing my house as best I could. I filled my bathtub with water, charged all my devices, and moved anything valuable away from windows. I had managed to find a few more candles at a gas station, but nowhere near what I had before. I also bought a camping stove and some propane, figuring that would at least let me heat food if the power went out. The day before the hurricane was expected to make landfall, I received another call from Sergeant Powell. The state attorney's office had decided to file charges against Patricia. She was being charged with 1 count of burglary of an unoccupied structure, a third-degree felony in Florida, and 1 count of petty theft. She had turned herself in that morning, been processed, and released on her own recognizance with a court date set for next month. "I wanted to let you know," Sergeant Powell said, "because she has been ordered to have no contact with you. If she tries to reach out or comes near your property, call us immediately." "Understood," I said. "Thank you for taking this seriously." "Of course." What she did was a crime, regardless of her position in the community. No one is above the law. After hanging up, I felt a strange sense of closure, but also anxiety about what was coming. The hurricane was less than 24 hours away, and the entire region was bracing for impact. The local news showed images of people boarding up windows, long lines at gas stations and grocery stores with empty shelves. That night, the wind started picking up. I tried to sleep, but kept waking up to check the weather updates on my phone. Hurricane Delilah was now a Category 4 storm with sustained winds of 140 miles per hour. The projected track had shifted slightly east, which meant Clearwater would likely experience tropical storm-force winds and heavy rain, but probably not a direct hit. The next morning, the sky was an ominous gray and the wind was howling. I could hear loose objects being blown around outside. The power was still on, so I made coffee and breakfast, not knowing when I would have electricity again. Around noon, the rain started, heavy sheets of water driven sideways by the wind. I was sitting in my living room, watching the storm coverage when the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The sudden silence was eerie. No hum of the air conditioning, no background noise from appliances, just the sound of wind and rain battering the house. I grabbed my flashlight and checked my phone. Still had battery and cellular service. The news app showed that Hurricane Delilah had made landfall about 60 miles south of Clearwater as a Category 4 storm. We were on the northern edge of the hurricane, experiencing the outer bands, but it was still intense. As the afternoon wore on, the storm got worse. The wind was so loud it sounded like a freight train. I could hear branches breaking and things slamming into the side of my house. I stayed away from windows and just waited it out in my interior hallway, which was the safest place. Around 5 in the evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. "Community center lost power. Lots of damage in neighborhood. Are you okay?" I texted back that I was fine, just riding out the storm. She replied that several trees had come down and some houses had roof damage. The storm was expected to continue through the night before moving north. As darkness fell, I lit one of my precious few candles and ate a cold dinner from my emergency supplies. I thought about the 24 candles that should have been here with me, the ones that Patricia had stolen for her stupid party. If those candles had still been at the community center when the power went out, at least they would have served some purpose. But according to Sandra, the police had taken all of them as evidence, so the center was completely dark too. I tried to sleep that night, but the storm was too loud. The house creaked and groaned with every gust of wind. I kept expecting to hear the sound of a window breaking or the roof peeling off, but my home held together. Finally, around midnight, the storm started to weaken. The wind died down to a more manageable level, and the rain became less intense. I must have dozed off because I woke up to sunlight streaming through my windows. The storm had passed. I got up and looked outside. My yard was littered with branches and debris. My fence had a section that was leaning precariously, and my mailbox was completely gone. But overall, my house seemed intact. I stepped outside to survey the damage. The neighborhood looked like a war zone. Trees were down everywhere, blocking streets and draping over houses. Shingles and siding were scattered across lawns. Power lines were dangling dangerously. It was worse than I had expected. I walked down my street, checking on neighbors. Most people were out doing the same thing, looking at the damage with shell-shocked expressions. I saw George, the elderly man who had advised me to stock up on supplies. He was standing in his driveway, looking at a large oak tree that had fallen into his yard, missing his house by only a few feet. "You okay, George?" I called out. He turned and nodded. "Yeah, just lucky, I guess. How about you?" "House is fine. Lost my fence and my mailbox, but that is fixable." We talked for a few minutes about the storm. He told me the power company was saying it could be a week or more before electricity was restored. A week. I did the mental math of how long my supplies would last. I had food for maybe 4 days if I was careful, and my candles would last 2 or 3 nights at most. As I walked back toward my house, I saw a familiar car pulling into the neighborhood. It was Patricia Mendez. She was not supposed to be anywhere near me due to the no-contact order, but here she was, driving slowly down the street, surveying the damage. When she saw me, she stopped her car. I immediately pulled out my phone, ready to call the police, but she rolled down her window and called out, "I am not here to talk to you. I am checking on my property." "You live 4 streets over," I said. "This is not your property." "The entire neighborhood is my concern as president," she said defensively. "You are not president anymore. You have been suspended, remember, and you have a no-contact order. Leave now or I am calling the police." Patricia's face flushed with anger. "You have ruined everything. I have served this community for 5 years, and you have destroyed my reputation over some stupid candles." "You stole from me," I said, my voice rising. "You broke into my property and took things that did not belong to you, and you know what the best part is. If you had not stolen my emergency supplies, you would not be facing felony charges right now. You did this to yourself." "Those candles would not have made a difference," she spat. "Look around. Everyone is fine. The storm was not even that bad. Are you serious right now? There are trees through people's houses. We do not have power. It is going to be weeks before everything is back to normal. And yeah, maybe my candles would not have changed anything major, but they were mine, and you had no right to take them." Patricia opened her mouth to respond, but then another car pulled up. It was Donald Richardson, the acting HOA president. He got out and walked over. "Patricia, what are you doing here?" he asked, sounding exasperated. "I am checking on the neighborhood," she said defensively. "You cannot be here. You have been suspended and you have a court order to stay away from Quinton. Go home before this gets worse." Patricia glared at both of us, then rolled up her window and drove away. Donald watched her go, then turned to me. "Sorry about that." "She has been spiraling since the charges were filed. Her lawyer is trying to get the burglary charge reduced to simple theft, but it is not looking good for her." "I just want this whole thing to be over," I admitted. "I never wanted it to go this far." "I know," Donald said. "But she brought this on herself. The board has been reviewing her actions, and we have found a lot of questionable decisions. She has been abusing her authority for years. This was bound to catch up with her eventually." We talked for a few more minutes before Donald continued his assessment of the neighborhood damage. I went back to my house and spent the rest of the day cleaning up debris from my yard. Other neighbors were doing the same, and there was a sense of community that had been lacking before. People were helping each other, sharing supplies, checking on those who were elderly or vulnerable. As evening approached and the temperature started to drop, I lit my precious candles and rationed my food. I had enough water for several more days, but I needed to be smart about everything else. I tried to read a book by candlelight, but my mind kept wandering to the surreal events of the past week. The next few days were hard. No power meant no air conditioning in the Florida heat. My house became stifling during the day, and I spent most of my time outside in the shade. The community center opened as a cooling station during the day, running on a generator, so I went there to escape the heat and charge my phone. It was strange being in the same place where Patricia had decorated for her gala just days before. The tables were gone, and the space was now filled with residents sitting in chairs, fanning themselves and sharing stories about the storm. Sandra was there, coordinating volunteers and distributing water and snacks that had been donated by various organizations. "We are setting up a community dinner tonight," Sandra told me. "Some people have grills and are cooking food that would go bad anyway. You should come." I agreed, and that evening I joined dozens of my neighbors for an impromptu cookout. People brought whatever food they had, and we shared a meal together. It was actually nice, a silver lining to the disaster. I got to know people I had only waved to before, and I heard more stories about Patricia's abuses of power. One woman, Deanna, told me that Patricia had fined her $500 for putting up a small garden shed without approval, even though the shed met all the HOA guidelines. When Deanna challenged the fine, Patricia threatened to put a lien on her house. Diana had ended up paying the fine just to avoid more harassment. Another man, Tom, said that Patricia had denied his request to install a wheelchair ramp for his disabled mother, claiming it would decrease property values. He had to hire a lawyer to fight the decision, which took months and cost thousands of dollars. The more I heard, the angrier I became. Patricia had hurt so many people, and stealing my candles had finally exposed her. It was satisfying in a way, but also sad that it had taken so long for anyone to stand up to her. On the fourth day after the hurricane, I woke up to the most beautiful sound, the hum of my air conditioning. The power was back. I actually cheered out loud. I immediately plugged in everything that needed charging and took a long, cold shower. It felt like a luxury. Over the next week, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Cleanup crews removed the downed trees, and people started repairing their damaged properties. I got my fence fixed and installed a new mailbox. The insurance company came out to assess damage throughout the neighborhood, and most people were filing claims for various repairs. The HOA board, now led by Donald, was working on policy reforms to prevent another Patricia situation. They established term limits for board positions, created an appeals process for fines, and mandated that all board decisions be made by majority vote rather than unilateral presidential authority. A month after the hurricane, I received a notice that Patricia's court date was coming up. I was listed as a witness and needed to appear. The night before the hearing, I was nervous. I had never testified in court before, and I was not sure what to expect. The courthouse in Clearwater was busy when I arrived. I checked in with the bailiff and waited in the hallway outside the courtroom. Eventually, Sergeant Powell found me and explained what would happen. "The state attorney is offering Patricia a plea deal," she said. "If she pleads guilty to petty theft, they will drop the burglary charge. She would face a fine and probation, but no jail time. Is she going to take it?" I asked. "Her lawyer is recommending it. Burglary is a felony that could result in up to 5 years in prison. Theft is a misdemeanor with a maximum penalty of 60 days in jail, which she probably would not serve anyway for a first offense." Sure enough, When the hearing began, Patricia's lawyer announced that she was accepting the plea deal. Patricia stood before the judge and pleaded guilty to 1 count of petty theft. The judge asked her if she understood what she was pleading guilty to, and she said yes in a barely audible voice. The judge then asked if I wanted to make a statement as the victim. I had not prepared anything formal, but I stood and spoke from the heart. Your Honor, what Miss Mendez did was not just about stealing candles. It was an abuse of the trust that our community placed in her as HOA president. She used her position and her knowledge of the neighborhood to take something that did not belong to her, all because she did not want to spend her own money on decorations for a party. Her actions left me without critical emergency supplies right before a major hurricane. I could have been in serious danger if the storm had been worse. Beyond that, I have learned that she has been abusing her authority for years, targeting residents she did not like and protecting her friends. Her behavior has damaged our community, and I hope the court takes that into account. The judge listened carefully, then addressed Patricia. Miss Mendez, your actions show a troubling pattern of entitlement and disregard for others. While this particular theft may seem minor to some, the circumstances are aggravating. You violated the trust of your community and committed a crime that you, as someone in a leadership position, should have known better than to commit. The judge sentenced Patricia to 1 year of probation, a $1,000 fine, 100 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay me restitution for the full value of the stolen items, plus the cost of replacing them. Additionally, Patricia was required to resign from any HOA positions and could not serve on the board for 5 years. Patricia accepted the sentence with visible bitterness. As we left the courtroom, she walked past me without making eye contact. Her lawyer hurried her out of the building, probably to avoid any confrontation. I felt a sense of relief. It was finally over. The woman who had made my life difficult, who had stolen from me, was being held accountable. It was not the harshest punishment, but it was justice. Over the next few months, life in Sunset Palms improved dramatically. Without Patricia's iron grip, the HOA became more reasonable and responsive. Donald proved to be a fair and level-headed leader, and the board started making decisions that actually benefited the community, rather than serving one person's ego. The neighborhood held a legitimate appreciation event in December, several months after the hurricane. This time it was a casual potluck in the park with no mandatory attendance and no stolen candles. I went and actually enjoyed myself, talking with neighbors who had become friends through the adversity we had shared. Sandra approached me at one point, holding a plate of cookies. I wanted to thank you again for speaking up about Patricia. I knew something was wrong for a long time, but I was too afraid to challenge her. You standing up to her gave the rest of us courage. I just wanted my candles back, I said with a smile. I never expected all of this. Sometimes standing up for yourself has bigger ripples than you realize, she said wisely. As the sun set on the gathering, I looked around at my neighbors laughing and talking. This was what a community was supposed to be. Not ruled by fear or arbitrary authority, but built on mutual respect and cooperation. Patricia had stolen my emergency candles, but in doing so, she had exposed herself and ultimately made our neighborhood a better place. I received my restitution check from Patricia a few weeks later. I used the money to buy an even better set of emergency supplies, which I stored in my garage with a new, very secure lock. I also installed a security camera system, just in case. The weather forecasters were already predicting another active hurricane season next year, and I was determined to be prepared. Hurricane season came and went the following year without any major storms hitting our area, but I kept my supplies well stocked. The emergency candles sat on their shelf, ready but unused. Sometimes I would look at them and think about the crazy chain of events that had started with their theft. Patricia moved out of the neighborhood about 8 months after the court hearing. She sold her house quietly and left without fanfare. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to an apartment in another part of Clearwater, far from any HOA drama. Good riddance, as far as I was concerned. The HOA elected new board members, including Sandra as president. She was unanimously chosen and ran the organization with transparency and fairness. One of her first acts was to establish a hardship fund to help residents who had been unfairly fined during Patricia's tenure. Several people, including Deanna and Tom, received refunds for excessive or unjust fines. Life returned to normal, or at least a new normal. I continued working from home, joined a neighborhood watch group, and even started dating someone I met at a community barbecue. Her name was Penelope Hart, and she lived in a different section of Sunset Palms. She had her own Patricia horror stories about being fined for planting flowers that were supposedly the wrong color. One evening, about a year after the whole incident, Penelope and I were sitting on my back porch watching the sunset. I had told her the full story of the stolen candles and the hurricane, and she found it both hilarious and outrageous. "You know what is funny," she said, sipping her wine. "Patricia probably spent more money on her legal fees and the fine than she would have spent just buying candles in the first place. Not to mention losing her house and her reputation," I added. "You ever wonder if she learned anything from it?" Penelope asked. I thought about that for a moment. Honestly, probably not. People like Patricia rarely see themselves as the problem. She probably still thinks she was the victim and I was just being difficult. "Well, I am glad you were difficult," Penelope said, squeezing my hand. "Otherwise, who knows how long she would have kept terrorizing everyone." "True," I agreed. Though I really was not trying to be a hero, I just wanted my stuff back. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the evening. Kids playing in yards, dogs barking, the distant sound of music from someone's radio. Normal, peaceful sounds. My phone buzzed with a weather alert. A tropical depression had formed in the Atlantic and was being monitored. I glanced at it and dismissed the notification. Whatever came, I was ready. My garage was stocked with supplies. My house was secure. And I had a community of neighbors who looked out for each other. The stolen candles had led to Patricia's downfall, but more importantly, they had revealed the strength and resilience of the people in Sunset Palms. We had survived a corrupt HOA president, a major hurricane, and weeks without power. We had come together, supported each other, and emerged stronger. As the last light faded from the sky, I lit a candle on the porch, one from my emergency supply. It cast a warm glow across our faces. Penelope smiled at me, and I realized that sometimes the worst situations lead to the best outcomes. I would never have gotten to know my neighbors, never have exposed Patricia's corruption, and never have met Penelope if not for that one frustrating discovery on an August afternoon. The candle burned steadily, its flame unwavering in the still evening air. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight I was content. The nightmare of the HOA theft was behind me. Justice had been served, and life in Sunset Palms was finally what it should have been all along. A real community where people cared about each other, and leadership served the residents rather than themselves. I thought back to that moment in my garage, staring at the empty shelf in disbelief. I had been so angry and frustrated, never imagining how that violation would ripple outward and change everything. Patricia had gambled that she could take what she wanted without consequences, because she had gotten away with it for so long. But everyone's luck runs out eventually, and hers had run out the moment she decided my emergency supplies were less important than her party decorations. The irony was not lost on me that the party she had stolen my candles for never even happened. All that planning, all that theft and deception, and in the end, the gala was canceled before it began. The candles she had so carefully arranged in centerpieces had been seized as evidence instead of creating the elegant atmosphere she wanted. And then the hurricane came and the power went out, and those candles could have actually been useful if she had not taken them in the first place. Sometimes karma works in mysterious ways, but sometimes it is pretty straightforward. Patricia had stolen emergency supplies right before an emergency, and when that emergency hit, she had nothing. I like to imagine her sitting in her dark house during the storm, realizing the magnitude of her mistake. Though knowing Patricia, she probably blamed me for her misfortune rather than taking responsibility for her actions. The community service hours that Patricia had been sentenced to were served at a homeless shelter, according to Sandra, who had heard it from someone who knew Patricia's lawyer. Apparently, Patricia had been miserable the entire time, complaining about the work and the people she had to help. She had learned nothing, it seemed, but at least she had been forced to give back in some small way. As for the burglary charge that had been dropped, I understood why the state attorney had offered the plea deal. Proving burglary required establishing intent to commit a crime at the time of entry, and while it seemed obvious to me that Patricia had gone to my garage specifically to steal, a defense attorney could argue she just wandered in and took the candles on impulse. The theft charge was ironclad. There was no dispute that she had taken my property without permission, so accepting the plea made sense from a prosecution standpoint. Still, I sometimes wished she had faced the more serious charge. A felony conviction would have meant more severe consequences, possibly even jail time. But then again, I was not interested in revenge, just accountability. Patricia had been held responsible, she had a criminal record now, and she had lost her position of power. That was enough. The neighborhood continued to heal and grow. The community center that had been the site of so much drama became a hub for positive activities. Sandra organized regular events, movie nights, game nights, exercise classes, and educational workshops. The authoritarian atmosphere that Patricia had created was replaced with something warm and inclusive. I became more involved in the community, joining committees and volunteering for various projects. It felt good to be part of something constructive after all the conflict. Penelope joined too, and we became known as a couple who could be counted on to help with events and initiatives. One thing that stuck with me from the whole experience was how important it is to speak up when something is wrong. For years, residents of Sunset Palms had suffered under Patricia's rule, but no one had challenged her because she was intimidating and vindictive. I had not set out to be a whistleblower or a hero. I just wanted my candles back, but by refusing to be pushed around, I had inadvertently started a chain reaction that freed everyone from her tyranny. It made me think about all the other situations in life where people tolerate bad behavior because confronting it seems too difficult or risky. How many other Patricia Mendezes are out there, abusing small amounts of power in HOAs, HOA, and local organizations? And how many people are suffering in silence because they do not want to rock the boat? My stolen candles had taught me that sometimes you have to rock the boat. Sometimes standing up for yourself is not just about you. It is about everyone else who has been wronged but was too afraid to speak up. I had not planned to become that person, but I was glad I had. The legal system had worked the way it was supposed to, slowly but surely. The police had taken my complaint seriously, investigated thoroughly, and gathered evidence. The state attorney had pursued charges. The judge had imposed appropriate consequences. It was not perfect, and it took time, but justice had been served. I also learned a lot about HOAs through this process. Before buying my house, I had not really understood what I was agreeing to when I moved into a community with a homeowners association. I had skimmed the bylaws and thought it all seemed reasonable enough. I did not realize how much power an HOA could wield, or how easily that power could be abused. Now I understood. An HOA can fine you, place liens on your property, and make your life miserable if run by the wrong people. But when run correctly, by people who actually care about the community rather than their own egos, an HOA can be a positive force that maintains property values and organizes beneficial activities. The key is oversight and accountability. The reforms that Donald and Sandra implemented, term limits, appeals processes, majority voting requirements, these were all designed to prevent another Patricia situation. No one person should have unchecked authority over an entire neighborhood. That is just asking for trouble. I shared my story online in a HOA horror story forum, and it went viral. Thousands of people responded with their own tales of HOA abuse. Some were worse than mine, involving tens of thousands of dollars in fines or even foreclosures. My story seemed almost mild by comparison, but it resonated because people appreciated that there had been consequences. So many of the other stories ended with the victims just accepting the abuse or moving away because fighting seemed futile. Several people reached out asking for advice on how to challenge their own HOA boards. I told them what I had learned. Document everything. Know your rights. Do not be afraid to involve law enforcement if crimes are committed, and rally other residents who have been similarly affected. There is strength in numbers, and most HOA board members are just volunteers who will back down when seriously challenged. Some legal blogs and local news outlets picked up my story too. I did a few interviews, always emphasizing that I was not special. I was just someone who refused to be stolen from and who followed through with holding the thief accountable. If that inspired others to stand up to HOA bullies, then some good had come from the whole mess. Patricia never apologized, not that I expected her to. People like her do not apologize because they do not believe they did anything wrong. Even when forced to plead guilty in court, she probably told herself that she was the victim of an overzealous prosecution, or that I was just being petty. The mental gymnastics required to maintain that worldview must have been exhausting, but she seemed committed to the delusion. I ran into her once, about 2 years after everything happened. I was at a grocery store in Clearwater, shopping for dinner, when I turned a corner and nearly crashed my cart into hers. We both stopped, recognizing each other immediately. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then Patricia turned her cart and walked away without a word. I watched her go, noting how much older she looked. The stress of the legal troubles and the move had clearly taken a toll. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy, but then I remembered everything she had put me and others through, and the sympathy evaporated. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. That was how life worked. As the years passed, the incident became a part of neighborhood lore. New residents moving into Sunset Palms would hear the story of the HOA president who stole emergency candles and got arrested. It became a cautionary tale and a point of pride. We had cleaned house and created a better community. My emergency supplies remained well stocked and unused, which was fine by me. Every hurricane season I would check the expiration dates, rotate stock, and make sure everything was ready just in case. Penelope joked that I had PTSD from Hurricane Delilah, but it was not trauma, it was preparedness. There is a difference. We eventually got married, Penelope and I. Small ceremony in the community center, which felt appropriate given everything that had happened there. Sandra officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for our wedding. It was perfect, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had become like family. During the reception, someone made a toast mentioning the infamous stolen candles. Everyone laughed, but it was the laughter of people who had been through something difficult together and come out better for it. The candles had become a symbol of standing up for what is right and not letting bullies win. I still live in Sunset Palms, in the same house where my garage was burglarized all those years ago. I love my neighborhood and my community. The HOA functions smoothly now. No drama, no corruption, just neighbors working together to maintain a nice place to live. Property values have actually increased since Patricia left, which makes sense. Who wants to buy into a community run by a tyrant? Sometimes I think about alternate timelines. What would have happened if I had just let it go? What if I had accepted Patricia's insulting $50 offer and moved on? She would still be HOA president, still abusing her power, still making people miserable. The community would still be dysfunctional and fearful. I would still be a victim, but I did not let it go. I stood up for myself, involved the police, testified in court, and saw it through to the end. And because of that, everything changed for the better. Not just for me, but for everyone in Sunset Palms. The emergency candles sit on their shelf in my garage, lined up neatly, ready for the next hurricane or power outage. They are just candles, simple wax cylinders with wicks, but they represent something more. They represent the idea that your property matters, that theft is theft regardless of who commits it, and that even small acts of standing up for yourself can have major consequences. Hurricane Delilah, the storm that hit right after the theft, was eventually downgraded in the record books to a Category 3 by the time it made landfall, though it was still devastating for the areas that took a direct hit. Clearwater had been lucky, catching only the outer bands. But I never forgot those dark days without power, rationing my meager supplies and wishing I had my full stock of candles. The weather patterns have only gotten more intense in the years since. Each hurricane season brings new threats, and the community takes preparedness seriously now. Sandra organized emergency preparedness workshops where residents learn how to stock supplies, secure their homes, and create evacuation plans. The irony that this was all prompted by someone stealing emergency supplies is not lost on anyone. I sometimes lead those workshops, sharing my experience and showing people what supplies they should have. I always emphasize the importance of securing your supplies and maybe investing in a good lock for your garage. People laugh, but they take the advice seriously. No one wants to be the next victim of HOA overreach or theft. The community has grown closer over the years, bonded by shared history and a commitment to doing things right. We look out for each other now, really look out for each other. When someone is sick or needs help, neighbors step up. When there is a problem with the HOA, people speak up and work together to find solutions. That is how it should have always been. As I write this, sitting on my porch with a cool drink on a pleasant evening, I can see my neighbors outside. Tom is walking his dog. Deanna is watering her garden with its gloriously colorful flowers. George is sitting on his porch reading. Normal, peaceful content. This is what community looks like when it is healthy. The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, the importance of accountability, and how one person's courage can inspire change. It taught me that Karen types exist everywhere, and that sometimes you have to be willing to go to uncomfortable lengths to stop them. It taught me that the legal system, while imperfect and slow, can work when you persist. Most importantly, it taught me that communities are worth fighting for. When someone is harming your community, whether through corruption, abuse of power, or simple theft, it is worth taking a stand. Because communities are made up of people, and people deserve to be treated with respect and fairness. My stolen emergency candles sparked a revolution in Sunset Palms. Patricia Mendez lost everything because she thought she was above accountability, because she believed her position gave her the right to take what she wanted. She was wrong, and her spectacular downfall proved it. The event where she planned to use my candles as decorations never happened, canceled before the first guest arrived. And when the power went out during Hurricane Delilah, she sat in the dark just like everyone else, except everyone else had their own supplies while she had nothing but the consequences of her own greed and arrogance. Justice is not always dramatic or swift, but when it comes, it fits perfectly. Patricia Mendez stole my emergency candles for a party that never was, and in doing so, she lost everything that mattered to her. Her power, her position, her reputation, and her place in the community she claimed to serve. And me. I got my candles back eventually, once the police released them from evidence. I also got a better community, a wife I love, and the satisfaction of knowing that standing up to a bully can make a real difference. Not a bad outcome for what started as a frustrating theft on a hot August afternoon. The candles burn just as bright as they did before, ready for whatever emergency might come. But the real light came from exposing the darkness of corruption and creating something better in its place. That light will burn far longer than any candle, illuminating the way for everyone who lives in Sunset Palms now and in the future. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes standing up for something as simple as emergency candles means standing up for an entire community. And sometimes, just sometimes, the bullies face real consequences and everyone else gets to live in peace. That is my story, the tale of how the HOA stole my emergency candles for a party, and how their event and their reign of terror both ended when the lights went out. It is a story about theft and justice, about hurricanes and community, about one man refusing to be pushed around and a neighborhood that found its voice. It is a story that I am proud to tell, and one that I hope inspires others to stand up when they see something wrong. Because in the end, we all have a choice. We can accept injustice and hope it does not get worse, or we can shine a light on it and demand better. I chose to shine the light, and Sunset Palms is better for it. My emergency candles are ready for the next storm, but more importantly, my community is ready to face whatever challenges come our way together, as neighbors should.